Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkavage, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Erica Riggleman, for another episode of the Thyroid Answers podcast. Dr. Erica, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. We are going to talk to another guest today. We have to get back to doing a podcast, just you and me. No offense to our guests and all the guests that have been on. They're all great to have on. But I think we need to get back and do another one and cover something that we can get into an in-depth discussion. But for today, we've got a guest, Jenn Malecha. Did I say that right?
Yep, pretty close. Malecha.
Yeah. Malecha. Yeah. All right. And she is a functional medicine practitioner. She's from the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition program. And she's here to talk to us today about some different aspects of health and function and physiology in regards to thyroid physiology. Jenn, thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you today?
I am doing super well today amidst this COVID stuff. Glad to be connecting with you guys and feeling some connection and you know, educating people about thyroid and all kinds of things health related. Like we were talking about the importance of just spreading the word in regards to this so that people can live their healthiest, best life, whatever that means to them, you know?
Yeah. And we were offline, we were talking about the COVID issue, and this is that time where everybody is struggling with what to do, how to improve their immunity. A lot of people are reaching for things that are over the counter, or what can they take. And I think today's podcast will be important because one of the things that Dr. Erica and I talk about all the time, I know it's part of the functional diagnostic nutrition training, is that at the root of what causes compromise the immune system is all health, diet, and lifestyle factors. So if you want to put time and effort into anything to improve your immune system, it's improving these foundational concepts, which we'll talk about in a bit. But before we get into the talking about what we're going to talk about in the podcast, we really need to get some background about you. How did you get into this space, this functional medicine space? What brought you to this type of a platform?
Yeah, well, I've always been just kind of intrinsically interested in health in some regards. So I was really active growing up. And when I went to college, I was aspired to be a sports psychologist. And so I went to college and majored in kinesiology as a pathway to get there and studied fitness, nutrition, and health. I actually did pre-physical therapy for a while, thinking that I was eventually going to go get my master's in sports psychology, but quickly decided that that wasn't the path for me. You know, working with athletes and a lot of the things that were required in terms of that schooling just wasn't what I wanted to do. So I kind of took a step back and I became a personal trainer because I was so just, you know, inspired by physical activity and fitness. And I thought this is where I can really help, you know, the lay person, the individual on a one-on-one basis. Because at the time, you know, going through college and studying kinesiology, you know, all you learn about is diet and exercise and diet and exercise. And I was like, yes, these are the answers to true health, right? And so through personal training, I started to notice that people weren't really getting the expected results with diet and exercise. They weren't losing weight as they should be if they were counting calories and exercising, doing other things, taking supplements. And I too started to have some health issues that were arising that I'd never had previously in my life. And it really just made me step back and start to question, you know, what I had been taught and where are the answers? What's missing here? And around that same time in 2012, I was introduced to Reed Davis, who I think you had as a guest on the podcast recently, and his program with functional diagnostic nutrition. It was like the first time I heard him speaking the language really that you guys talk about so much here on the podcast. It was like the light bulb went off and I was like, here's all the missing pieces. And I immediately got into that program. And around that time I had been diagnosed with skin cancer at a really young age of 24, like no family history or genetic kind of reasons for that. I wasn't baking myself out in the sun. And as part of going through the functional diagnostic nutrition program, I was really enlightened about what was happening in my body. So even though I was the healthiest person that I knew, because I was a personal trainer at the time, right? Eating broccoli and boneless, skinless chicken breast was about like every meal, eating my lean proteins, and every 2 hours as directed. I discovered that I had really high oxidative stress. going on. I had a congested liver. I had HPA axis dysfunction. I had H. pylori overgrowth and a myriad of other things that really shed light on how I was able to cultivate cancer in my body. And so I cleaned up all of that stuff in my own health. And I was like, this is stuff that people need to know. I need to get out there and help people with this, because I was the picture of perfect health. I would go to the doctor, get my annual physical. I got a gold star every single year because my cholesterol, my blood pressure, all that stuff always looked great on paper. And I was an active person, so they deemed me as healthy, but that's not necessarily what was happening in my body or how I was feeling. And I just knew that there was other people out there struggling with it too. So that's part of my mission, is as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, is to help people get their hands on the right lab tests and resources so that they can find the missing pieces of their health puzzle and get back to feeling like themselves again. Or maybe for the very first time, if they've been dealing with health issues for a long time, they may not even know what their true self feels like. What does it feel like to have optimal health? And so that's where I'm at today, is helping people out there utilizing that approach, which again is very similar to you guys. And also mentoring. I do mentor functional diagnostic nutrition practitioners and other health professionals in business too, because it's great to have the training and the knowledge, but if you don't know how to deliver it as a service or a business, then you're really not helping anybody, right?
Right.
So.
Absolutely. I love your story of the transitioning of, you thought that you were the perfect bill of health until something happened. And I think that a lot of our listeners and a lot of our patients that we see, they think they're healthy, and then all of a sudden they get blindsided by whether it's a diagnosis of hypothyroidism or whatever chronic illness, with you, cancer, obviously. And it can be sometimes blindsiding and really shocking, because again, you thought you were doing everything right. And I think that realization for a lot of people is really, really important, which is why we do the podcast, making people realize that there are little signs and symptoms that we often ignore that really is really important that you shed light on, and then realize that there are things you can do to mitigate that before it becomes something bigger. Now, I think that just recently you have also had other health challenges. You got diagnosed with a thyroid condition as well. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. So that was my first light bulb moment, right? And what I kind of tell the people that I work with, I'm like, look, life still happens, so just because we achieve a certain level of health doesn't mean that you're never going to have life happen to you again. So there I was, I would say, like in 2013, after going through this program and resolving, HPA axis dysfunction and bacterial overgrowth in my gut and congested liver. And I'm happy to say, sitting here with you guys, I'm over 10 years skin cancer free at this point in time. So once I cleaned up what was going in my body, the cancer never came back. And I live in San Diego, so I'm like in the sun all the time, right? And I actually, at that point in time, I was thinking at that point in time in my life in 2013, I just turned 30, like I was getting married that year. I was like, this is the best I've ever felt. This is amazing. I couldn't even like begin to think what better would possibly feel like. And so here I was coasting, and then all of a sudden, just over time, little things started to change. Like all of a sudden I started to put on weight, and it wasn't a lot. Like I was still fitting in my clothes, but over the course of about 2 years, I put on about 15 pounds. And this is how it happens, right? Like with people, it's very little increments. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you look in the mirror and you're like, crap, I put on 15, 20, 30, however many pounds it is. And because it happens so slowly, you don't really pay attention to it. Another thing that when I look back, at the story, I had gone to the dentist during that time frame, and he said that I was grinding my teeth. And I was like, okay, like bruxism, that's interesting. So I happened to test my gut again and came up with candida and blasto and some parasites. And I was like, this is interesting, because I'm doing all the things that we would tell our people to do to support my health. Like I'm eating an anti-inflammatory diet. I'm going to bed by 10 p.m. I've started to remove toxic products out of my household. Like, I was exercising regularly. I had started working on a meditation practice. So, we think about those foundational principles of health. I was doing a lot of that stuff, but I had these weird health things that started accumulating over time. And it really accelerated from a hormonal standpoint, I was still on birth control at the time too, and hadn't really made that leap yet. But I started having breakthrough periods. I started having inflamed breasts that like I could feel heat radiating through like 2 layers of fabric on my breast. And I started to kind of freak out. I went to every allopathic doctor specialist that I could, find, some of the best women's health, specialists in San Diego. And I literally had doctors say to me, well, we're not sure what that is. Maybe we should just keep an eye on it. And here I am freaking out that I might have breast cancer or something. I'm like, I don't really feel comfortable just keeping an eye on it. And I even had one doctor say, well, maybe you've put on 15 pounds of muscle. And I was like, do you know how hard it is for women to put on muscle? Like I used to do fitness competitions and I would train hard for 6 weeks straight. And I would be lucky if I put on 2 pounds of muscle, And so I was like, I really need to just take a step back and look at this at my own, like be my own health boss, which is kind of my brand. And, it was just kind of divine intervention. Like I remember it so clearly on a Thursday morning, I was working I had gone out, I was still training a couple of clients at the time. And I had had a 12-day period at that point in time. And my period had stopped that morning. And I was training some clients. I went back to sit in my office to work through the rest of the day. And after 2 hours of sitting in my office, my period started again. And I was like, there is something going on in this room. There is something weird. And I opened up the closet door and sure enough, I don't know why I had never looked at this or never noticed it, but the entire like top ceiling of our closet had black mold in it. And so I was like, oh my God. So I immediately like got myself out of there. We tested it. And sure enough, like long story short here, we had Stachybococcus in our house. We had mold for who knows how long. And how it correlates is that I had started working from home 2 years prior to finding the mold. And 2 years prior is when I, over the course of 2 years is when I started having all of these like health issues pop up again. And so, I'm definitely one that I think that you have to have the foundations of health in place, like these healthy principles that, mold is not always a problem or environmental factors not always a problem, but they do play a role in thyroid dysfunction or other health issues. And this for me, certainly when I tell clients this all the time when I work with them is that we're not going to go down that rabbit hole until we know that you have the foundations covered. And that was exactly my case. It's like I was doing all of the things that we would tell our people to do, and something else was still aggravating my body, my system. So went in to do some testing, did a Dutch test, did some blood work, came back. I was very estrogen dominant, which basically explained a lot of the breakthrough periods and menstrual cycle irregularities I was having. I had thyroid antibodies. So, elevated estrogens or even mycotoxins can trigger antibody production. I was hypothyroid at the time, as just a huge picture of all the dysfunction that was going on. So got off of birth control and started to heal my body from there. I went on thyroid medication, the lowest dose of WP thyroid for a very short period of time. And I was able to get into remission in 6 months. So I did, dive deeper into the diet. I went on an autoimmune paleo diet to eliminate additional inflammatory factors. I really dug in deeper into the environmental factors. Like, we got a whole house water filtration system to eliminate chlorines and fluorides and bromelains and all the things that could have been additionally aggravating my thyroid in the situation. So, and now here I am 37 and I can look back at 30 and be like, I feel way better now than I did today than at 30 when I first reached that milestone in my health.
I think that's, for the people who are listening, I mean, this is not an unusual story, right? We get a lot of people who are trying to do the right things and still have challenges. There's a whole bunch of people that aren't doing a lot of the right things, have challenges, but there are a lot of frustrated people who are eating the right way, exercising, dieting, and still wind up having hypothyroid conditions or other conditions, and they get confused as to why. But I think what you point out is that this is a constant work, right? Always working to try and improve what I call like your fitness of your metabolism, the fitness of your environment, the fitness of your diet, the fitness of your physical state, right? Your emotional state, your mindset. And so it's a constant battle to work on improving those levels your level of fitness in each of those health categories. And if any one of those is extreme, or you have a bunch of them that are compromised, that can be enough that can trigger what we call the cell danger response, right? We go from a system that works in what we call a homeostatic regulation system to a system that now has to adapt to deal with this excessive level of stress. And I think it also then points out a lot of what we talk about on the podcast is you have this stressor, right? Whether the mold, did the mold go right to the thyroid gland and attack the thyroid gland, or was the toxins from the mold get right to the thyroid gland and that's what created, or was it just you get that toxic load into the system on top of some other things that creates stress in any cellular systems. And as peripheral cellular stress starts to build, now you start to get the shift inside the cells from homeostatic regulation to allostatic regulation. Your cells start to try and actively slow down metabolism. And one of the ways to make that metabolic shift is to deactivate thyroid hormone locally. And so you start to see that, hey, I can't get glucose into my muscle tissue. I can't get it into my liver. I got to store this stuff as fat. It's a slow progressive build, right? If this cell stress becomes persistent and consistent, then these cells that are in danger mode start to alert surrounding cells that they're in danger mode. More inflammation is produced, more release of things we talk about on the podcast, DAMPs, damage from your own cells, PAMPs, pieces of of any organisms that may be in the system. They float around in the system to increase the activation of the immune system or the inflammatory system. But the thyroid tissue is very sensitive to this. Your thyroid cells have these pattern recognition receptors on them that when these things start to bind, these DAMPs and PAMPs start to bind to the thyroid cells then realize there's a danger process going on. And then they start to they actually become like an immune-like cell and start triggering the release of inflammation, start triggering self-destruction of the thyroid tissue, and send out signals to the surrounding system, the immune system, the inflammatory system. And it's essentially the thyrocytes themselves, the cells of the thyroid gland, that invite the lymphocytic infiltration. And you would say it's an autoimmune process. The immune system's out of control. But that's where we have to really start to ask better questions like, is it really an immune system out of control, or is it an immune system trying to globally slow your metabolism down because the body recognizes that, hey, I'm past my point of management here. I can't do this on my own. I got to slow the metabolism down so that I can get control of the process. Does that make sense?
100%. And that's exactly what I teach the clients that I work with all the time, is that it's a cumulative burden. Your body doesn't wake up one day and decide to be dysfunctional. So often, like when I work with somebody, our very first conversation is I actually have them tell me their story from the beginning. I'm like, I want to know what your health story has been from the point of birth. Were you C-section? Were you breastfed or not? Did you get sick as a kid? Like, what has been this cumulative load that your body has experienced over time? And, in this modern day world that we live in, it is so many things, right? It is the toxins. Like, we live in a world now where a huge human experiment where I don't even know what the number is at, but the last time I looked, it's like over 120,000 toxic chemicals have been introduced in our environment since, World War II or whatever it is. And I'm like, our liver and our body, where there's never been a human, existence or mankind that's had to deal with this amount of toxic load that we have today, right now, in addition to the stress that we have from work, the traffic that we get stuck in our relationships, as well as the inflammatory processed sugar, high carb foods that we're eating. And then what do we all do? We go to the gym and we run ourselves into the ground trying to work it all off, right? That's so many clients that I talk to. I'm like, what do you do to de-stress? And they're like, oh, I work out. And then when they overindulge in food, what do? They work out. Well, one of the things that I talk about is that exercise is even a stressor. Typically, exercise is a good kind of stress. It's a eustress, right? We go, our body responds, it builds stronger bones and muscles. But when we're, just as you're talking about, like when we're already in this depleted, burdened state, now you're adding more load on the body in terms of exercise. We're breaking it down and asking it to build back up again when it's already depleted. And that was definitely part of my story, having come from being a personal trainer, doing fitness shows. It was ingrained in my just way of being that I needed to hit the weights hard. And looking back, before I knew I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's and had the mold stuff going on, it was very clear. Like when I would go out for a run, my legs would feel like dead weights. I was not recovering from my workouts. And what did I do? I kept pushing through. So was it actually the mold, like you're saying? Possibly not. If I was doing lower intensity exercise and maybe some other things, or I didn't have other stressors going on, maybe my body could have tolerated the burden of the mold. My husband didn't get sick from it in the ways that I did, but he also wasn't working in that same office or room. So there, again, like to your point, it's that repeated, burden that I was experiencing over time, that consistency, that the system eventually starts to go haywire and break down, right?
Yeah, I think it's oftentimes the perfect storm with a lot of people is that, it is the accumulation of things, and each person, take 5 people and have the same exact stressors, their body's going to respond to it differently. So, even though your husband might have been in the same household with the mold, his body might have been able to detox the mold better or handle it. Maybe his immune system is a little bit better. Maybe it was your working out. And so, and this is often, we talk about this all the time on the podcast about how you can't compare yourself to other people and say, well, nobody else in my household is sick, so it can't be my home. It's got to be something else. And I think that going back to the environmental stuff, it is huge in health and recovery, because it's often an environment that you're in all of the time. And if you don't know, like if you hadn't opened that closet door to see that mold, you would have been thinking that you were doing everything right and beating yourself up. Like, why am I still struggling with this, and not, beating your head against a wall trying to figure out why, when it was something that, as invisible as the mold is, you didn't see it because it was behind a wall. And there's so many things in our environment that you can't see, like mold.
Right.
If you find the mold, you can see it on the wall, but there's other things that are invisible that can create just as much havoc on our health.
Exactly. And that's, what I say is that you can't always hear, see, feel, or smell toxins, but they're there, right? And we can't live in a bubble either.
Mm-hmm.
But they do the research that we're seeing, like the endocrine disruptors, the obesogens, the xenoestrogens, like the types of toxins that are in our environment these days and what they're doing to our bodies. We have to educate ourselves a little bit better. There's a great book, Estrogen Nation, that I just was like looking at too, talking about all the estrogens, like this whole COVID thing and everybody using Purell hand sanitizer and the xenoestrogens that are in that stuff. I'm like, oh, we're gonna have another, epidemic after this. But, the concept is like, well, let's be responsible and take action where we can. Like, how can we reduce our exposure to reduce the burden on the body, because there are other factors at play at our life? And then what can we do to naturally support the body's own detoxification, capacity, right? Like the foods that we eat that help to boost detoxification, or the supplements that we can take, or something as simple, like I'm a huge fan of castor oil packs. I use those for myself and with my clients because of how they can help stimulate the not only detoxification, but balance hormones and reduce inflammation in the gut. And that is, it's actually relaxing too. It helps to boost oxytocin and reduce cortisol levels. And you can do it while you're meditating. So I'm like, there's a lot of low cost, little time required things that we can do to help to offset the exposures that we can't really always control, right? But then it also goes back to, well, we need to address diet, rest, exercise and supplementation as well in those areas to mitigate that entire burden on a day-to-day basis. And as you were saying earlier, I think it's always a work in progress. Like this week might be a more stressful week at work than it was last week. And so how can you take care of your body differently or better this week, knowing that that's on your plate, like going to bed a little bit earlier, or being even more mindful about your food. So you're constantly balancing the scales all the time, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple key, really important points there. One of the things we were talking about is, Eric is talking about the toxic burden, what's invisible. You're talking about, hey, that we can't always see these things. And many times those things are right in front of us, right? And yet we've been told that they don't have a problem. There's no problems with, what the internet and we're on what?
5G.
5G. There's no problem with it. Although there was problems that they now find out about 2G and 3G, but 5G should be fine, right? We have cookware that's sold. People don't think that their cookware could be problematic, and yet now we're finding out, but nobody's telling anybody that, hey, it could be a problem. So even some of the stuff that is toxic is right in front of us, but it's almost, we've become almost become numb, almost like listening to a pharmaceutical commercial where you hear all the things it does wrong. In the beginning, when people heard those things, they were like, oh my God, I'll never take that. Now, people are just like, yeah, it kills you. Yeah, whatever.
Whatever.
We're just so used to it that I think the same thing happens with the toxins in our environment. And I think one other key point there is and I think, Erica, you kind of alluded to this, is what's challenging. And Jen, excessive exercise and lack of rest were the things that drove my Hashimoto's when I had it. And, I'm doing all the right things too, but I was training excessively, not sleeping well. I had poor respiration from multiple broken noses. And then you add parenting, work, get 4 hours of sleep. All of that stuff is a cumulative effect. And in my 20s, I could adapt. In my 40s, I couldn't adapt. And that's what creates the problem, is that we think that we have the same level of adaptability that all the time, and it varies, right? And I think that's the key sign of health isn't the absence of disease, which is, what maybe the World Health Organization would tell you, but health is really how adaptable, resilient, and that you are in your environment, right? And it should not require, you have to be able to self-regulate to have average health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when most of us are talking about what health is, we're thinking about average health. We're not talking about above average or extreme health, right? We're talking about the average. That's where most people kind of circle. But there's a whole bunch of people that are assuming that as long as the limited lab panel that was performed is within normal range, or that the medications they're taking bring them back into a lab normal range, reference range, that they have optimal health. They don't. They're maybe they've brought themselves up to a sub-average level of health, but they're not healthy. And that's the important piece. Last piece in that is the higher your level of health, the more adaptable you're going to be in any environment, right?
Yes.
And that's a great analogy is exercise, right? Somebody who doesn't do any training but doesn't need to do any running, they may say, I'm adaptable to my environment, I'm good. But if we take them and say, let's go for a 10-mile run right now, they may die on that 10-mile run because they can't adapt. Are they unhealthy? They're healthy for their environment, right? Mm-hmm. But they don't have a higher state of health because they couldn't adapt to that environment. I consider me healthy, but if I looked at an uber endurance athlete who can run a 100-miler or could do something else that's really crazy, they're more adaptable for their environment. I'm not at that level of health. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So I think we almost have to redefine for people what health is, because I think it's been bastardized so much that nobody really has a good idea. They have this perception like healthy is that lean guy, right? Or that lean person, right? That's the healthy person. But we all know somebody who looks fantastic, who's struggling with IBS and Crohn's and hypothyroidism. The looks aren't always the everything. And everything tailors into it, which is what I want to ask next as you're working with clients, right? And we talk about, okay, we've had things that create stress. I kind of draw out a wheel of factors that contribute to health and wellness. So what are the factors that you like to have your clients look at, like to say, okay, these are the things we need to take a look at on our journey together to help get you from where you are to a higher state of health? What are those factors that you look at?
Yeah, so I think the first, just to preface this, is that it has to be a personalized approach. I think what we've been talking about here is that the old paradigm of like matching somebody with a cluster of symptoms and then giving them an in a box solution, whether that is for thyroid or even with your diet or your fitness, like saying like, this is the perfect type of, CrossFit is the best type of exercise that you can be doing versus, HIIT training is the best type of exercise that you can be doing. There is no best, there is no one size fits all in any, element of health whatsoever. And so that is one of the things that I like to get to first and foremost, is just getting somebody to understand that this is going to look different for you than it's going to look for everybody else, like we were talking about earlier. And one of the key things that I teach them on is that, there's a difference between eating healthy and eating right for your body. So eating right for your body will incorporate healthy foods, but not every healthy food is going to be right for your body. We can all globally agree that a banana is a healthy food, right? Nutrient dense, like if it's organic, it's great. However, if you have a food sensitivity to that banana, not great for you. It's contributing to that inflammation burden overload. If you don't tolerate carbohydrates very well, not a great food option for you. So one of the core foundations is definitely figuring out, what diet fits them best. And I think that blending dietary approaches is key. Like if we look at something like an autoimmune paleo diet, even a Whole30 paleo, whatnot, those are all, for the most part, an elimination diet. We're eliminating certain things out of their diet. But what about the macronutrient balance? Those diets don't actually address macronutrient balance. And you get something like keto, which is more macronutrient driven, like, general keto is less than 20 grams of carbs, per day or whatnot. That doesn't really work for a lot of people. But with our bodies, the way that we metabolize foods, and based on, are we more sympathetic, parasympathetics, fast oxidizers, slow oxidizers? Like, what is the balance of macronutrients? So I actually will help clients kind of blend those concepts, because again, it's not one that's going to be perfect for anybody. It's how do we take the pieces of it and figure out what works best, for your body. So that's extremely critical. And I usually start there, because when we start there, they instantly start feeling better. Their energy goes up when they're eating the right foods. Inflammation goes down, bloating goes down, brain fog starts to dissipate, and they're more motivated and incentivized to follow through with the additional, recommendations. And then secondly, I address sleep. And I say that we have to learn to value sleep more than diet and exercise. I think in most cases, I don't even address exercise with anybody. If anything, I tell them to stop exercising or just focus on walking till we can fix diet and sleep. Because if you are not getting adequate rest on a regular basis, it basically cancels out all of your diet and exercise and any other efforts. Like sleep is when our body restores itself. It's when, based on your circadian rhythm, it's when we're running very important processes like detoxification of the liver and the gallbladder and the kidneys, or, our brain, as well as like human growth hormones being released. Like all these things are happening at nighttime. And I really talk about the importance of the sleep time frame. So there's, a lot of talk out there about, oh, you need 7 hours, or you need more deep sleep, you need this. But based on our circadian rhythm, and if we look at, primal cultures, even that exist in this modern day world, like they're typically asleep within a couple hours after the sun sets, because temperature lowers, light decreases, the body reduces cortisol, releases melatonin, and that's what this sun cycle is, what stimulates this hormonal rhythm that we have in our body. And so I just find that people recover faster, heal their health issues when they are asleep by 10 p.m. at least 5 nights out of the week. And then also we address, they need to be sleeping through the night. And so, making sure that they're not waking up in the night. Like so many people think that it's normal to get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And I'm like, that's not normal. I just interviewed a 76-year-old woman the other day, and she was even saying that she's 76. You would think that an older woman, as we get older, we tend to have bladder issues. I think that's the conception that we have. but she sleeps through the night. And she was like, when I cut out refined carbs, she's like, I slept through the night. I no longer get up to use the loo. She's from the UK anymore. And I was like, exactly. So we work on, and this is where the diet piece comes in. Like when we work on diet first, it automatically starts to resolve some of the sleep issues as well, because we're balancing blood sugar. We're getting, they're able to sleep through the night and balancing cortisol and everything. So those places are huge. In terms of, I think that's got to be the core of everything that kind of sets up the next stages. And then from there, depending on the person, it might be working on exercise, whether they're overdoing it or underdoing it. Or I think that the next, as a society, the next biggest piece is actually the mental emotional part. We think about the kind of the classic textbook example of, the way that our nervous system works is that we have this brilliant mechanism that's evolved with us in terms of like our sympathetic and our parasympathetic, responses. And the classic textbook example is like, if you see a lion, on your lunch break, then your body is going to trigger that sympathetic response, which, puts you into flight or fight mode. But the reality is that we don't see lions during our lunch break, but we do deal with stress constantly throughout the day. And when we're doing that, whether it's because we're back to back with meetings, or we're stuck in traffic, or we're dealing with kids, or whatever is happening, we're beating ourselves up because we're looking in the mirror, we're not happy with how our bodies look. That low grade sympathetic response constantly all day long is like a barrier to healing, because we can only heal when the body's in a relaxed state. The more that we can get into parasympathetic mode, like when we're in that sympathetic mode, all of our resources, our blood flow goes outwards. It's not, our body's not concerned with digesting and healing and nourishing our vital organs when we're in sympathetic mode, right? So I really think as a society, the biggest third piece is definitely working on, de-stressing from a mental, emotional perspective, because we are so overloaded. There's so many expectations on us all the time. And sometimes we are, creating those expectations because we're trying to be the best, compete with everybody else. And we just need to take a step back and do what's best for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing to kind of touch on what Erica was saying earlier is we're all going to experience some type of stressful encounters, experiences in our environment, right? But I think really doing some of these other things right is going to allow those experiences with coworkers, with significant others, with family members, with kids, to not put us into the excessive stress load, right? Not push us into the fight or flight mode, because we're adaptable. We can manage with that a little bit better, right? And so I think, when we look, I think diet's a key component, sleep's a key component, emotional fitness is what I like to call it, right? Mm-hmm. Physical fitness, when you're talking about exercise, we still have to have a level of physical fitness. We've talked about respiratory fitness and how important proper breathing is. That ties into with the emotional component, right? And the sleep component. What other aspects do you take a look at in their physiology, or are there other aspects that you take a look at and say, hey, these are other things that we have to consider as possible things that may be adding to your stress load, mm-hmm. right? That may be triggering that excessive stress challenges.
Definitely. I mean, when I work with clients, we start with some testing, and this testing are really to look for healing opportunities. I think some of the stuff that you're like alluding to as well. So looking at, how are the systems of the body online, or are they not online? Because they are contributors to and results of whatever this metabolic kind of chaos problem, this storm that's going on. And so like in my cases, is like I kind of shared as an example is, over with these different instances in my health journey, like I had, bacterial overgrowth or yeast overgrowth. So when we have pathogens like gut bugs, they create internal toxicity and internal stress, and they also dysregulate cortisol patterns because of their activity. And so that's a healing opportunity, that when we can clean some of that stuff up, we've now just eliminated a stress factor, right? Also the inflammatory food component. doing some testing and understanding what foods are you reactive to. And to your point about, adaptability, you may not be reactive to them forever, but for right now, they're contributing to that burden. So let's remove them, give the body some space to heal, and then we can look at reintroducing them. And ideally, if you have that, if you've built up your adaptability, that strength in that area, you should be able to tolerate most of those foods back into your diet, right? Looking at the hormone patterns, I'm a huge fan of running a Dutch test to look at the hormone pathways. I think that I glean so many clues in regards to estrogen and the estrogen pathways, liver function on that test that just isn't getting picked up, anywhere else to really understand. Like in my case, estrogen, like we kind of mentioned in the beginning, elevated levels of estrogen can actually trigger thyroid antibody production, right? Can downstream trigger HPA axis issues that you're having. So it's got to be a multifaceted approach. And I think that it really starts with doing a very comprehensive assessment in the beginning. Let's get the full picture. Let's understand what, from a functional standpoint, what is happening in the body? Where are there opportunities to clean some things up, to bring some systems back online? It's like, you can't, like, that's like having your car, like your air filters dirty all the time. You're never going to get great like gas mileage if you just never clean your air filter out. That's kind of like our liver. You're never going to get great gas mileage and energy if you just got this clogged liver all the time. And so it's really getting all those systems online and utilizing the objective data gained from that analysis to help drive the recommendations for the lifestyle changes. Because then it's very specific. You're no longer taking a shot in the dark with what it is that you're doing. And you can also go back and retest and see, like, are we moving in the right direction? I just had did a retest with a client yesterday on her Dutch test. And she's like one of these kind of cases that we're talking about. She had elevated estrogens coming into working with me. She's doing all of the things that we're talking about in terms of like the foundations of health. And we've marginally seen her estrogen move at all. And actually in some cases it went up, and I was like, okay, like, where are you getting exposed to estrogens? Like, what is happening here? And it also reinforced, we've been working on eating a lower carb diet because she was eating upwards of 200 grams of carbs per day. And I was like, I see insulin resistance like written all over this. So it was reinforcing and motivating to her to make those dietary changes. So we're still going to work on that. And I was like, let's also get a little bit deeper in exploring, are there things in your environment that are driving up, your estrogens, right?
Yeah. And you talk about testing. How do you manage your thyroid issues right now? Like, what testing do you do? Or, I know you had said at the very beginning that at some point you went on some thyroid hormone for a period of time. So how do you manage and keep current with your thyroid issues without taking medication at this time?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And as I mentioned, I got into remission within 6 months, but then it was like, I wanted to watch it very closely because I didn't want to slip. So I was testing my thyroid, doing a full thyroid panel every 90 days at a minimum. I was retesting my Dutch very frequently because I was watching that estrogen balance, taking a look at like the estrogen metabolism as it related to liver function as well too. And once I had, a full year of consistently being within a functional range, I then was like, okay, I'm going to go back to like, 6 months, every 6 months. And now I test, once a year because I think that testing is great, but we also have to trust our bodies in some respect too. And now I know a clear difference. One of the things that I've blogged about is like, I didn't know that I had brain fog until I didn't have it anymore. Like, I would have never said I had brain fog. And then when I came out of the fog, I was like, oh crap, I had brain fog. So I know I have this like very confident feeling of what it's like to feel in my body, what my definition of healthy is. And at any point in time, if I feel a slip coming, then I would go to testing for myself. But I do think, in general, a full thyroid panel, and I can't tell you how many times I try to go through the channels to help clients get thyroid testing through their allopathic doctors because they can get it covered through insurance with them, not through me. And it's just kind of disappointing sometimes that even though I arm them, I say, these are all the markers that I want you to get, they go in and they don't get them. But I think a full thyroid panel, TSH, total T4s, T3s, free T3s, antibodies, reverse T3, T3 uptake, all of that's, super important if you're managing a thyroid condition, so we can see the whole picture. And I think that complementing that specifically with a Dutch test to see HPA axis function and the rest of the hormones, just gleans so many insights as to the full picture, because it's all part of the endocrine system. It's not isolated into one area. And I think from a Dutch test, you can get a lot of these clues in regards to like insulin resistant factors, liver congestion. If the, phase 1 estrogen metabolism isn't going so great, you can even get some of the nutritional markers on there, or the neurotransmitter markers that can give you some insights that, maybe there's a gut problem, going on here too. And I would say that a stool sample test, like running a GI map, Diagnostic Solutions, is very top of my list with everybody that I work with, because of the intestinal health markers that we get on there and the discovery of those healing opportunities of pathogens that are creating that internal stress and toxicity.
Yeah, I would look at probably, we're talking about testing, and this is important for the listeners to understand, I think, and Jen, you can chime in if you disagree, but I think foundationally, when you're looking at what's going on with your own health, I think everybody should have a comprehensive metabolic panel done as part of a regular screening. Mm-hmm. And the challenge becomes the word comprehensive, because depending on who's ordering the labs, there's a different definition of comprehensive. Yep. When I started in healthcare, 30 some years ago, a comprehensive metabolic panel was pretty comprehensive. It was about 40, 50 tests. My comprehensive basic metabolic panel is about 65, 66 tests, something along those lines, which includes the comprehensive thyroid panel, inflammatory markers, blood sugar markers, fasting insulin. And, people are like, I had a comprehensive blood chemistry and it was 12 tests, right? That's not comprehensive. I had a comprehensive thyroid panel, it was 2 tests, right? What gets measured gets managed. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to, and this is where it becomes difficult for a person, right? Because they're going to go to their primary care and they're going to say, hey, I want a good blood chemistry done. And they're going to get a limited panel because somebody else is paying the bill and they only want to pay for what's deemed medically necessary to prescribe a medication or provide a treatment. And it's important for the listeners to understand that in functional medicine, we take a totally different approach. We want a 30,000 foot view of what's going on so that we can see the problems that may be developing and not waiting for the disease to show up as an abnormal reference range.
Right.
And that's the second piece of that, is that when you go to a functional medicine practitioner versus you see your allopathic practitioner, we're going to look at the labs a little bit differently. We look at what we call functional ranges, which are the optimal range that the body works in. And that is like really close to the median value in most labs, right? It's like 0.5 standard deviations, about 19% of the population tested falls in that area. What your doctor is looking at is the lab reference range, which is often 2 standard deviations away from the median, and that encompasses 95% of the population. That is not the healthy level of, it's not the healthy level that the body works in. So you have to understand when you're going to somebody like Jen or Dr. Erica or myself, we're going to want to take a look at a broader panel because there's more data that we can get. We can get a view of what's going on, big picture, and we're going to look at different ranges, because that way, and Jen, you might as well comment on this. I'm sure you've had people come to you and say, my doctor says I'm perfectly healthy based on my labs. And you take a look at those labs. I know you take a different look at it with your training and say, look, I see like 5 or 6 problems here. You have an insulin issue, you have an inflammatory issue, you have anemia pattern, you have deficiency issues. And they're like, my doctor never said any of that stuff. And the reason is because how it's perceived. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Oh my God, I would love to. So one of the, philosophies that's taught in the functional diagnostic nutrition program is that we treat the person, we don't treat the test results. And I think that that is, you know, I was that perfect person on paper. You know, I was perfect on paper, but I felt like crap, and nobody wanted to listen to me because I looked perfect on paper. Right. And that's exactly the type of person that comes through my practice oftentimes. Is they are, you know, I would say that I work with, I call them kind of evolved people. They're already doing paleo or Whole30 or keto or carnivore or something, but they still aren't getting the health results that they're wanting. And it's not that they're looking to achieve even, you know, what optimal health is. They're literally suffering with health issues every day, like whether it's bloating or brain fog or, you know, weight that won't budge or whatever is happening with them. Or they, you know, they come in and they're like, I got put on thyroid medication and I still feel like crap. Right. But and the blood work kind of reflects maybe they should be feeling better, but we have to treat the person. And I think and we have to treat the person on both sides of that, because I also am a believer in that, you know, if somebody feels good, but their test results come back looking not so great, do we really need to chase that? You know, I am one of those people, actually. You look at my Dutch test and my metabolized cortisol kind of comes back in the tank every single time. And I'm like, I couldn't even imagine if I had in range metabolized cortisol, I would be like bouncing off the walls. I have so much energy. I'm like, how is this even possible? And so I think that we need to understand is what's important is how the person feels. And do they feel healthy in their life, not our definition of health, but in their own life? You know, when I repeatedly ask my clients, I'm like, what is it that you really want? Like they'll initially say, I want weight loss, or I want to manage my thyroid naturally. And then we get deeper. I'm like, what would having that do for you? As we dig deeper, at the end of the day, they're like, I just want to feel like myself. I want to live my best life. And so that could mean a myriad of things. And when we look at the lab testing, I think that's what we always have to be going back to is, you know, if somebody still has health issues and main complaints, yes, we need to continue to pursue those opportunities on the lab test, versus if they're actually feeling really good and they're totally happy with where they are, we need to, like, you know, recognize that too. And that everything doesn't always have to be fixed. And I think, as you guys both know, you know, you're aware, like our thyroid values, for example, can change like every minute, right? So whenever we're doing a test, it's also just a snapshot in time. So but I think what we sometimes do in the functional medicine world is we give a voice to those people who have been trying to pursue getting healthier through the conventional pathways, and nobody's listening to them because their test results are within normal conventional ranges, but they're like, no, but you're not hearing me. I feel awful. You know, I don't feel like myself.
Yeah, I think we see that far too often.
I think we talk about too, and we've said this about labs. Labs need to be interpreted, not read, right? Based on health history, timeline, signs, symptoms, medication, supplements. And so when we look at a lab value, we can't just look for an H or an L. We have to say, is that lab value normal? And which range are we using? And is it appropriate? If you feel well and the value is normal, then it's probably appropriate. Is the value abnormal but appropriate? I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I don't have any energy, and your TSH is elevated. Yep, it's an abnormal value and it's appropriate because you feel a certain way and your lab work is starting to show that. I feel like I'm on fire. I feel like everything's swollen. Yep, and your inflammatory markers are elevated too. So the values are abnormal, but they're totally appropriate for how you feel. Now we have to figure out why. Right. Lab values could be totally normal but inappropriate. Because if you were tired, fatigued, your hair's thinning, and your TSH was normal or low, your doctor would say you don't have a thyroid condition because it's normal or low. But yet we have to interpret it based on what else is going on. Hey, we ran the rest of your lab panel and 3 of your inflammatory markers are elevated, which is suppressing your TSH. And so even though it's normal, it's inappropriate for you. But now when we look at the rest of the lab panel that we ran, that your doctor didn't, your primary care didn't run, we can now see why it's suppressed. Right. And then the last way to look at it is it abnormal and inappropriate? Like, I feel fantastic, but your CRP is 13. There's a problem here, right? Now we do need to put that work in. Hey, you feel great and your insulin levels or your fasting blood sugar is a little bit elevated. Okay. Everything else is good? Yeah. What was going on that day? I don't know. I didn't get much sleep, whatever. Okay. It was abnormal, but it was appropriate for what was going on, right? So we have to interpret. I don't think, to to be fair, I don't think that as many allopathic physicians have the ability or the time or do that. I think what happens is sometimes the lab interpretation initially gets screened by somebody who's looking for an H and L, and if there's no H and L, then the doctor's told the labs are all normal, and then the patient's like frustrated because they don't realize a comprehensive panel wasn't done. They don't realize what range was being used, and they don't realize that their allopathic doctor has a different criteria for when help is needed versus when we in functional medicine have. Our criteria is if you're less than optimal, we want to be able to intervene and get you closer to an optimal state. Where the allopathic physicians taught, hey, there's no intervention here unless there's a disease to treat, a symptom to suppress, or a procedure to do. Otherwise, we don't want to be giving out drugs willy-nilly to everybody because that would be over-treatment. And so that part, it can be frustrating for them and really, really frustrating for the patient because they don't realize that there's this parallel universe to medicine, which is functional medicine, that should be filling the gap in from I don't feel optimal, but I'm not diseased. Where do I go? And that's really where the home for functional medicine is. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we need to be collaborating more. I am a huge fan of saying, it's kind of like that old adage, like it takes a village to raise a child. I think that it takes a team to get somebody healthy. For example, I'm not a chiropractor. My clients need chiropractic care. They need massages. They need acupuncture. They also need allopathic medicine. I don't manage medications. That's outside of my scope of practice. So when somebody does come to me and they're on thyroid medication, or if I recognize that there might be a benefit of that, I talk with them about that. Like this, girl that we just ran the Dutch test on yesterday, based on what's going on here and making the changes that we're going to make. I'm like, you need to be getting your thyroid tested every 6 weeks, because as we change the HPA axis, the need for medication is going to be different. That is outside of my scope of practice. We need to work together with these things. And I've had, there have been opportunities. There's a naturopathic doctor here in San Diego that I partner with, and I'll refer people to regularly for any of that, kind of medication, disease care, like management that's outside of my scope. And we 100% collaborate together, exchange notes, like talk about supplements, dietary recommendations, and respect each other's point of view and do one of the conversations that we frequently have is that we don't want the client to feel torn and having to make a choice between our points of view. And that's so critical, right? So we have to be on the same page. And, when I work with clients and we do their results reviews, I invite them. I'm like, invite your personal trainer, invite your chiropractor, anybody that's on your healthcare team that you want to share this information with, invite them to our Zoom call. And I've had quite a few personal trainers, by the way, join in, and it's like light bulbs for them because now they understand how to train that person in a way that supports their health instead of breaking it down. Right. And so it's not just the allopathic side. I think it's like, all health practitioners as a whole, everybody in this field, like we can come together. We like to I sometimes call it like cooperation, like we're cooperating. We're not in competition necessarily. Like you said, everybody has their role, and we need to have one common goal, and that's helping people. That's helping to change the tides of health, because if anything, this pandemic has shown us that we're not in a good place, as a globe, like globally, in terms of our health necessarily. And, I think is very interesting about this situation is that, as we were kind of talking about earlier, I think Erica, you mentioned it, is usually it takes a catastrophic event for somebody to change their health. Like mine was skin cancer initially, and then it was getting diagnosed with Hashimoto's. I was like, oh, I have to make some additional changes. What I see happening right now is everybody, the whole world is experiencing a catastrophic event. It's brought health, the awareness of what health really is, to ourselves, how do we protect ourselves from viruses like this to a whole new level that we've never experienced before or seen before. And I think moving forward, we're going to see this hyper awareness of health. And I hope that this helps to bridge that gap between functional medicine and allopathic care, where how do we actually implement more prevention management like we're talking about instead of just disease care, so that we don't see thousands of people dying on a daily basis because some virus came through. Like, we should have the stamina and the vitality to fight a virus. We shouldn't see it wiping people out in the way that it is right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it goes back to what Eric was saying earlier about the adaptivity. I've been saying for years to my patients is that, whether we're dealing with Epstein-Barr or Lyme disease, whatever pathogen it is, I tell them that, like, look, right now we've got this going on, but there's going to be another one. There's going to be a different pathogen. And obviously right now we've got the coronavirus that we're dealing with, but it's not about getting rid of the pathogen. That can't be our focus. It's got to also be about building our immune system stronger, because there is going to be another one down the road. And so you can't just have crisis care for the virus or pathogen, whatever it is at that time. You've got to prepare for the next one, because there will be another one. And it's about building our body as strong as possible so that it can manage and fight it off. I mean, that's really, we've got to be resilient and adaptive to the next thing coming.
Exactly. I think Epstein-Barr, like EBV, is such a perfect example, because I feel like that has been one of the latest crazes in the thyroid world. Like, oh, it's EBV. EBV is a problem. It's what's triggering your thyroid. And I'm like, doesn't everybody have EBV? I think that the CDC or somebody says that like 80% of the population has it because it's exchanged via saliva. If that was the case, everybody would have a thyroid problem. But to your point, we are all harboring, whether it's like herpes simplex or EBV or other viruses in our body, or COVID-19. I mean, look at how many people have the antibodies to it. Like, it's, there are people that are carriers for it. But it is the ability to keep it under control so that it doesn't, take over our health. And I think it goes back to this concept that we've been talking about. It is the cumulative burden overall. It's not the EBV, but when you have the toxins, the poor diet, all the other stuff and then that triggers maybe the EBV to be more active or whatever is happening, then you get this, it's like the perfect storm. It is an explosion, but there's no single factor in this equation in any terms of our health at all.
Yeah, I think that's where allopathic medicines right now is struggling, is they're trying to come up with the magic bullet theory to deal with it, and realize what we all really need to realize is what's making maybe Erica susceptible to COVID-19 is different than what's making Jenn susceptible to COVID-19, which is different that's going to make me susceptible. So people are saying, well, you got to wipe your hands, you got to do this. Hey, the person's got diabetes, right? So if they got diabetes, they don't regulate their blood sugar. They have chronic tissue damage. We need to figure out we need to get to that root issue. And if we get that under control, now that person's more adaptable. It doesn't matter what the name of the virus is, as Erica said, they will be more adaptable. The fact that they are diabetic already shows that they're not adaptable to the dietary foods they're putting into the system because their body can't manage it. And so we should take a look at these people who are having chronic health issues that we think we are managing, and we're managing their health, but we're not improving their health. And so they aren't adaptable. The next thing that occurs, what creates another condition in the body, high blood pressure. Now I've got this disorder. Now I've got that disorder. It is their body just can't adapt anymore. And then we wonder why this virus would be so problematic for this compromised community. Well, they lost their adaptability 10, 20, 30 years ago. We were just bandaging them and babying them along. And then when something pretty severe comes along, or maybe it isn't as severe as we think or we're saying it is, maybe it's just this population of people just can't adapt any longer. And that virus just has an explosive effect in their physiology. So
yeah, I was just thinking something like while you're talking about that, people might be listening and wondering, well, how do I know if I've lost adaptability, right? And I think what this always gets chalked up to, what people say is like, oh, I'm just getting older. If you find yourself saying that, oh, I just have more aches and pains because I'm getting older, or I can't lose weight because I'm getting older. I would say that that is like a clue there that you're losing that adaptability. Oh, I have a shorter fuse. Like I'm more irritable because I'm older. I think that is like, when we talk about that adaptability, that's something that my clients really notice, is they're like, I can just handle stress so much better. Like the littlest things don't, send me off anymore. Like my boss got upset and I just like, it rolled right off my back. And I'm like, that's a kind of adaptability that we're talking about, being able to recover from your workouts. Age has nothing to, I don't believe that age has really anything to do with it at all. It is like, you can redeem your adaptability. I have, and I've seen many people do it too. So if you're somebody out there that's, saying those things to yourself, like, I think Dr. Tom O'Brien, he always says it might be common. Just because it's common doesn't mean that it's normal. And we oftentimes in our society have just deemed things to be normal because they are common, but it's not normal to have acid reflux because you're older, or, your hair to be falling out, or some of these things that are going on. And so let's get everyone's adaptability back. That's the goal.
Yeah. And I think that's probably a great place to end this podcast. It's been a great conversation. We probably could chat for another hour or two, but we'll let you kind of sign off. I got to do another one here in a few minutes. So if people are interested in learning more about what you do and what you talk about, where can they go to get more information about you?
Yeah, they can definitely hit up my website. It's holistichealthboss.com. And holistic is spelled with a W, just like Whole Foods. So holistichealthboss.com. I also, if you go over there, I have like a 21-day program to help you work through, like, figuring out your macronutrients and some of the sleep cycle stuff and gut bugs that we were talking about today. Otherwise, I'm super active on Instagram. So you can find me on Instagram at Wholistic Health Boss, and on Facebook as Wholistic Health Boss too. And I really appreciate a conversation with you guys. It's always so inspiring and invigorating to talk to like-minded people. So thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And so we'll sign off. Definitely you can find Erica at Brain and Body Health Center, right?
Yep.
You can find information about me at rejuvigencenter.com. That's my website. Both of us are active on Facebook and Instagram. And I have, I got to plug this or my editor will be unhappy. I have this book coming out soon. This is The Thyroid Debacle. This is the book I did with Dr. Kelly Halderman. And this is our discussion on a different way to look at thyroid physiology. It's really based on a lot of the concepts that we've talked about here today. Dr. Erica and I talk about on a regular basis. You can, if you're interested in learning more about it, you can, wherever books are sold, you can pre-order now. It is in pre-order status. So with that, we'll sign off. Jen, thanks so much for being on the podcast. Dr. Erica, it's great talking to you again. Yeah. And look forward to another Thyroid Answers podcast coming in the next week or so. All right?
Yeah. All right. See ya.
Take care.